Why does it say I'm Sasha?
Yeah, I don't know. Everyone right now is saying guest, which is weird. It's saying my guest. So I don't know who's like who for a lot of people. But you can,
This
I
was
think you
just the
can,
link that was in, yeah.
oh, the one that I emailed out. Maybe that's why. Well, I'm going
Hmm.
to start just admitting some people.
Okay. All Sashas.
Yeah, it's weird.
That is really strange. I've never seen that. One sec. I just have to put some stuff away.
I mean, sorry. So for whatever reason, it's bringing everyone in with my name. So everyone's going to have to update their name, but
no problem.
Beyond that fun one, shouldn't be, everything else seems like it's going well.
Great.
Can you all hear me?
Yeah.
Yes.
Shoot, it's going through my speaker, not my Bluetooth.
All right, so you could co-host.
Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Shoot, it's still going through my speakers.
All right, so you all thus far are.
My name's spelled wrong.
Oh no, did I spell it? Oh yeah, I did. Sorry.
Oh.
Sorry about that. There we go. Okay.
Okay, can you hear me?
Yep.
Yes.
Yes. All right. Yes, got it. Whew.
Can you all hear me okay too?
Yes.
Yep.
Okay.
I see another Sasha Rappaport in the waiting room.
Yeah.
So everyone here has the agenda, right?
Yep.
So Santiago, who's going to be doing the intro for Santiago?
That's me.
Caitlin, okay. And then we're going to who? I'm trying to pull up the agenda right now.
Then we're going to Angela Bai. Is that Bai?
You're cutting out. Is that just me?
I can hear it pretty fine, I think.
Yeah, I can. It seemed okay.
I'll just do without headphones. Can you guys hear me all right now?
Yeah, I can hear you well.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, so we'll do Santiago, and then we'll go to Angela of Sunrise Movement. Yeah, and then I think it's just handing it over to you guys.
Yeah.
Okay, great. So Naveen, you and I will just do a quick intro, and then we'll go right into the presentation. I'm going to do an intro before we start the slide. So like I had texted you when I say today, I'm going to do a little intro, and then I'll say today we prepared a 40-minute presentation. That's when you can start the first slide, which is the landing page with the blue Public Bank LA page.
Sounds good.
Yep. And then while we're doing, so I'm going to start off with just a brief welcome, and then hand it over to Caitlin, who's going to then introduce Assemblymember Santiago, and then thank, and then just do a brief introduction of Sunrise, and then introduce the two of you, and then you can basically kick off, if that works.
And then as far as presentation mode goes, it's going to be presentation plus a little box with our face.
Yeah. So
Correct.
I'm going to test it right
Okay.
now. So I'm going to start sharing my screen. And so it should continue to have everyone's face. So here's what I'm going to just start the meeting with. Can you see?
There we go.
Is this, and then you can
Yep.
see the box. Yep. Okay. So this is what it's going to be like. And because you're all co-hosts, it should have our four frames in it at all times.
Okay. Naveen, can you test your screen share? Why
Sure.
don't we do that right now?
All right. I'm going to stop sharing.
Hey, Sasha, real quick for Sunrise, is Angela going to say a couple words, or I'm just really
Yeah.
saying? Oh, she is. Okay.
I asked her to do like a 1 to 2 minute intro, like super quick intro.
Great.
Yep.
Good?
Yeah, this
yes.
looks great.
That
Great.
looks good. Wait, are you doing PDF? Is that a PDF or is it PowerPoint?
No, it's PowerPoint.
You sharing it? Oh, that's weird. It looks like a PDF.
It's because
like
see, there was
all
animation on it, so
continuing.
I left the slide transition in there, which is it's just up down on slides.
That's weird. I don't see animation on my computer. I don't know what you're talking about. So bizarre.
I took out the rest. It's fine.
Okay. Wait, can you just do it
Um,
again? I just want to see it.
Yeah, 1 sec.
So I'll just go next. Okay. Yeah,
Good?
that looks fine.
Okay.
Yeah.
Great.
I was just making sure people can read the text with a box next to it.
They can also move it on their own screens. The box with the speakers is click and draggable.
Mhm.
So I've got a couple links to drop in the chat. So obviously just the home page for Public Bank LA. I thought maybe I could link to the resource booklet if you all want.
Yeah, let's do we don't really need the homepage. The Action Network letter encouraging folks to sign and share, and the resource booklet if they want to flip through a 20-something page booklet.
Cool. Okay, I'll be ready to blast those in the chat.
So those are
Awesome.
those are our 3 action steps. Is 1, call your council member and encourage them to vote yes. And I'll say that at the end. 2, sign and share the Action Network letter for the LA Public Bank, and then 1177, which is the state assembly bill that just passed. You have the links for those for the all 3? We can do the 1177 at the end. We don't need to worry about that. But right now, since this is an LA focused teach-in, let's just push the Action Network one.
Okay.
All right. And then just out of curiosity, I'm going to share my screen briefly. I'm just going to share this. So if I'm not on this, can you see, all you see is the graphic, right now?
Yep.
Yes. Well,
Okay,
I see
great.
you and the graphic.
Yeah.
I see you,
and
me,
that's-
and the graphic.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yep. Okay, good. All right. Then I think from my standpoint, I'm good to go to kick off. We'll keep this graphic up as we do kind of introductions, and I'll stop sharing when we introduce, I think probably introduce Assembly Member Santiago, and then we'll just have him take up the full screen.
Great.
Okay,
And you
cool.
all are you're controlling that on your end, right? We're not. I know we're co-hosts, but we're not doing the switch back and forth between the screen. You're controlling that, right?
Yep, I'm controlling that, and then you'll Naveen will be able to share his
What's
screen.
that? What
Yeah,
is music?
I don't know.
What is that?
It's
I think it
Caitlin.
was Caitlin.
Are you playing something? Oh, go off mute.
Oh, I think it was the homepage of Public Bank or something.
Oh yeah.
That scared the
So
crap
don't
out of me.
open it.
Like, oh my God. It was so like foreboding.
Don't open it.
I didn't know there was music on there.
Okay, so I've got the change.org link and the action.
No, not the
network.
change.org. No,
Oh.
no, not the change.org.
Here,
Action
it's,
Network. It's just an Action Network.
Oh,
Okay,
just
I'm gonna
Action
send it
Network
right.
and the booklet.
it's
Yeah,
bit.ly
Yeah.
/ support PBLA.
right there. Thank you.
Yeah. Do you want to use a bit.ly?
Yeah, I'm dropping it right now.
Okay.
Here's the bit.ly. Oh, sorry,
Okay.
you just did it. I just did it too. There we go.
Great.
So it's the same link.
Okay. So
One's
they're
a
the same
bit.ly.
thing. So just the booklet and the Action Network link.
And then the booklet is bit.ly / LA booklet. PBLA book, I'm sorry. I'm going to drop that right now so you have it.
Awesome.
There we go. Without the HTTP.
Okay. Great.
All
So
right.
are we engaging folks while we wait for others to join a call? Maybe
Yeah, I think I'm gonna.
just say hello to everyone.
Yeah, I think I'll open it up at, in probably 30 seconds here. There were just under 200 people that RSVP'd. So then I'll start letting people in from the waiting room.
When do we want to start? I'm assuming a few minutes after 3.
Yeah, exactly. I'm thinking like probably 3:03, 3:05.
But my question is, do we want to start engaging some of the people on the call once we let everyone in?
Sure. How do you
say hello?
want...
Thank you for joining us.
Oh yeah.
Hello,
Sorry. Yes,
us.
I'll say hello and just let everyone know
well,
that we're gonna be getting started. Welcome.
Yeah, we've got a special guest joining us, and we're waiting for Assemblymember Santiago to jump on, and we'll start. We'll start in a few
he's
minutes.
here. So I'm admitting him in.
Oh,
I'm gonna
okay.
make him a co-host. So.
Oh, here we go.
All right.
Hi.
Hey, Assembly member.
You're on mute. You're on mute.
Hey, Miguel works fine, folks. Thank you.
Okay. Wait. So Sasha, when should we have Miguel come on? You're going to do an intro first, or do you want to let him do it first?
I think.
How long's your intro?
My intro is less than a minute, and then I immediately, literally, probably a minute before we introduce Miguel.
Okay, so sounds good, Miguel. We're gonna.
I'm good.
With LA Forward, it's gonna do a 1 minute intro, and we're gonna kick it off to you. Sounds good.
Yeah, no, I'll just be a minute and a half too, because I want to make sure people get to the teach-in. Kind of exciting, actually.
Woohoo! Yeah.
Good work, everybody.
I still can't believe it got done. I mean, to be honest with you folks, I still can't.
Right?
The stories we can tell someday about this thing.
Do you want to start letting folks in?
Yep, I'm gonna let everyone in now and continue to admit people in. Caitlin, while I'm speaking, just make sure that you can admit people too, right? All right, so I'm gonna just admit everyone in, and we'll get started in about 2 minutes, and we'll intro and then hand it over to you, Miguel. All right, Here we go. Hello, everyone. Welcome. We're going to get started in just about another minute here. Let people join.
Also, feel free to use the renaming feature. For some reason, there's a lot of Sashas. So feel free to rename yourselves. You can do that from the participants list.
All right, everyone, we're just going to give it another minute here, and then we're going to go ahead and kick off. All right, thank you everyone for joining. We're going to give it one more minute, and then we're going to go ahead and get started today. All right. We are about 3 minutes past the hour. I think we'll go ahead and get started. So welcome everyone. Thank you so much for coming today to join us for this Public Bank Community Teach-In. My name is Sasha Rappaport. I'm an organizer with LA Forward. We are an organization working to bring together a diverse community of people dedicated to fighting for policies that will make LA a fair and flourishing place for everyone. We do this through neighborhood organizing, policy education, and digital activism, with focus on policies that impact climate, housing, and transit justice. I'm going to hand it over to Caitlin Gray of our climate justice team, who worked to help make today's teach-in possible. Caitlin, take it away.
Thanks, Sasha, and thanks everyone so much for being here. This is very exciting. I just wanted to say a couple quick words about LA Forward's climate justice team. So the climate justice team acts as a hub to connect all Angelenos who want to do something about climate change with direct actions they can take to protect our climate and promote environmental justice, particularly at the local level. So within our climate team, we have these hubs that focus on specific initiatives, like establishing a public bank for LA. So if you're interested in more info, you can visit LA Forward's website and the climate justice team link. I just popped it in the chat. And so to kick things off, we're excited to introduce Assembly Member Miguel Santiago, who represents California's 53rd Assembly District, which includes downtown Los Angeles, Koreatown, and Boyle Heights. In the legislature, he has pushed progressive policy legislation and platforms, including free community college, millionaire's tax, which would have increased taxes for taxpayers making over $1 million, and protected millions of renters from eviction during the pandemic by lead authoring the Eviction Protection Law. He also co-authored the Assembly's Green New Deal Joint Resolution, and Miguel Santiago passed AB 857 to establish public banks in California. He's currently working to pass AB 1177, the California Public Banking Option Act, which will give all Californians access to a no fee, no penalty debit card account and would help uplift working class families across the state. So welcome, Assembly Member Santiago.
Hey, thank you for having me on, and for everybody who's on. I especially want to thank LA Forward, Public Bank LA, the Sunrise Movement LA, and ACT LA for your strong advocacy and helping to push to get this done, because we got it done in the legislature, but we still need that grassroots organizing and strategies to make sure that it gets done in Los Angeles and all across the state, because we have the opportunity to set up local public municipal banks, and it really will be incredibly important if we want to establish in California the Green New Deal. And let me say that this is a game changer, and I just want to share a moment about how we did this and what kind of opposition we face. So we don't expect that opposition to go away. We know that it's just going to get stronger to fight this kind of movement, particularly in the Los Angeles area. I'll tell you this: when we did it in the state legislature, we really did fight just about every big Wall Street bank, but also every heavy paid lobbyist. There must have been at least 20, 25 lobbyists who were paid fighting us at every single corner. And I will tell you that this is the only bill of consequence that got done in the legislature where there was absolutely zero lobbyists fighting for it. Zero. We had not one single lobbyist. It was all done through grassroots organizing, activism, community leadership from the bottom up. And it was really led by a movement across California, unlike anything else that was seen. We literally beat down Wall Street lobbyists, dozens and dozens going to every member's office, both in the Assembly and the Senate, and they fought extremely hard. And we want to take that sort of movement, and we want to fight in LA to make sure it gets done, because the resolution is passed in LA. They're going to start the public bank process, but we know that if it's anything like what happened in Sacramento, they're going to fight tooth and nail to make sure that this never happens. And we need hardcore leadership at the grassroots level, at the community level, progressive leadership all across the state of California to make sure this thing gets done. And I especially want to thank a whole heck of a lot of folks who participated, but Trinity Tran, who is participating today, helping with the teaching, along with some of the leadership in Southern California. I really want to give them a big round of applause. And I know we're doing this virtually, so I can't really all stand up in a state, and have her stand up, but a really big round of applause. I cannot emphasize enough the kind of fight that happened in Sacramento, and the kind of movement we need in Los Angeles, San Diego, San Francisco, Oakland, Sacramento, and other areas that are thinking about implementing this, because we really need to continue to push for this. Now, we are now pushing, if you want to engage, and Trinity will explain a little bit later, I hope as well, into implementing BankCal, which will be a statewide platform that will eliminate the need for big Wall Street banks, that will allow for free services, free banking, no overdraft fees, no penalties. And this is really geared to uplift communities of color up and down the entire state, who currently, while we've fought to make the minimum wage a reality here in the state of California, still get gouged on every dollar when they bank. And we know that this is happening. And this is the bottom line. When a millionaire and billionaires make money, that money makes more money. When low-income communities of color earn 15 bucks an hour or less, that dollar is gouged at every corner by a big bank, by payday lending, by a liquor store that charges money for cashing, by check cashing places, or by money order. So we really want to fight to implement that as well. And we're going to need your help because it's not an easy fight. It just got out of the Assembly. We put a large coalition of progressive groups, about 181 of them in the state of California, and labor groups who are also helping to push this, because we believe, along with public banks, have really initiated in California the banking revolution that we hope catches wind across the country and finally does some sort of equitable banking, because we can't live the way we are now, and we're not going back to the new norm. We want something better than that. So I want to thank everybody for your incredible leadership, and continue to push forward. Thank you very much for having me on today, and I hope to continue to engage with you, because we've got to get this done. Thank you.
Thank you, Assembly Member Santiago, for being here with us today, and for all the important work you do for all Angelenos and Californians. So next, I'd like to introduce Angela Bai of Sunrise Movement LA, one of our amazing partners for today's event. Angela?
Hi, everyone. Warm welcome to everybody here with us today. I'm Angela from the LA hub of the Sunrise Movement. And for those of you who are not yet familiar with us, we're a youth movement fighting to stop climate change and to create millions of good jobs in the process. So we're pushing right now to launch the decade of the Green New Deal, and we're super excited to be allied with Public Bank LA, because public banking is going to be such a crucial step for local Green New Deal policies pretty much everywhere. We need to get money out of fossil fuels and other harmful industries, and then we need to reinvest that money in communities, which will create those good, clean jobs that we need. And so public banking will really get us that much closer to achieving climate justice. So I'm super grateful to be at this teach-in representing Sunrise. Hopefully some of you are from Sunrise, from our base. And so I'm super excited to be learning and growing with everybody here today. Thank you.
Thanks so much for being here, Angela. So next, we are incredibly excited to hand it over to Trinity Tran and Naveen Agrawal of Public Bank LA, who have been leading the fight for a financial revolution that will prioritize people and planet here in Los Angeles. Trinity?
Right, thanks, Caitlin. I'm Trinity Tran. I'm lead organizer of Public Bank LA and California Public Banking Alliance. I'm going to do just a super quick intro and then hand it over to Naveen, who's going to do a quick intro, and then we'll go right into our slides that we have prepared for today. So once again, I'm Trinity Tran. I'm a lead organizer and founding member of Public Bank LA and California Public Banking Alliance. Both are volunteer organizations. And within the last few years, we've been incredibly laser focused, working to transform finance with an amazing volunteer team. I led the Divest LA campaign, which succeeded in taking on Wells Fargo in 2017. Then that became the Public Bank LA initiative. We led the Measure B campaign in Los Angeles, which was a citywide ballot measure that secured over 430,000 votes in Los Angeles for the city to take the first steps to create a public bank. That then led to AB 857, Assembly Bill 857, which Miguel Santiago, Assemblymember Santiago, who was just on, led the efforts with us in the legislature, and that bill passed and became a law in 2019, at the end of 2019. And we are now currently working on two fronts, both with the LA Public Bank Initiative to create a city-owned bank in Los Angeles, and then the statewide AB 1177 bill, which just passed the Assembly this past Wednesday. So we thank all of you for joining the teach-in today, especially on a Sunday, and we thank Assemblymember Santiago for stopping by to cheer on the grassroots, and huge thanks to Sunrise Movement LA, ACT LA, and of course, LA Forward for organizing and coordinating this meeting today. So I'll hand it over to Naveen for his intro.
Hey everyone, my name is Naveen Agarwal. Really glad to be here with everybody. I have been organizing with Public Bank LA for about a little over a year and a half now, and we've worked on a couple of statewide efforts. AB 857 was one of them, and then we're also engaged in helping to move this forward on the LA level, which we're really excited to talk to you about today. I also come to this work from affordable housing, having worked in affordable housing lending, and then now on the development side for acquisition and rehabilitation of existing affordable housing around the country, which has really informed my perspective, which I'll speak to a little bit later as well. And with that, I'll hand it back to you, Trinity, to go through our slides.
Okay, great. Thank you, Naveen. So we're incredibly excited to have everyone join us today for the Public Bank Los Angeles teach-in. Public banking is really an important cornerstone of the progressive movement, because it's the ability for a public bank to fund a just, sustainable future, from affordable housing to an LA Green New Deal to infusing resources back into rebuilding frontline communities. It is a truly transformative movement, and it is an evolutionary movement, because what we are fighting to inevitably is to revolutionize the current financial system from a system that is based on greed, that is extractive, that is based on pursuing larger profits, and transforming that into a system that's based on serving the public interest. It's creating a publicly owned banking system where our money can be used to benefit the people and our environment, and rebuild and empower our communities from the ground up. And we're seeing a lot of really incredible movement in this space, with elected officials in cities across the state of California, as well as the country, moving towards exploring municipal and state public banks. And it really comes down to three primary reasons. One is leverage, that a local government with its own public bank. Naveen, you can keep it at the first one. That's fine. Naveen's controlling the slides, so we're co-sharing this. So the first is leverage, and it comes down to three primary reasons why we're seeing this movement in the public banking space. Is leverage. A local government with its own depository bank can create up to 10 times the credit to inject back into the local economy. Two is low cost credit. A public bank can allow local governments like LA to be able to cut the cost of funding for public projects. With money saved, we can redirect funds to number three, which is funding local investments in areas that actually help our people and our planet. And the need for an alternative to our financial system is immediate, and it's urgent, especially as we're rebuilding from the pandemic, because we can no longer continue with the status quo. It's the system where Wall Street dominates all priorities for how public funds are used. It's truly now the time for local control over our money based on our values. It's our money, our values, our bank. And so it is really a logical and common sense idea whose time has come. And that is why we're seeing this traction in cities across the state as well as the nation. So today we've prepared about a 40-minute PowerPoint presentation. So in the first half of the presentation, I'll explain what a public bank is, why we need public banks, the benefits of public banking. I'll also touch on the successes of current existing public banks, the Bank of North Dakota, as well as the Spark has a network of public banks. And in the second half of the presentation, Naveen Agrawal will discuss how public banking empowers through a city-owned financial institution, how a public bank can reflect our community values and allow LA to invest in priorities like affordable housing and a Green New Deal, and how it can help bring democracy and transparency to the banking and investment of our public funds. So with that, we'll start with the first slide, Naveen. So Divest LA, just to give a bit of a history on how Public Bank LA came to be. Our work with public banking is rooted in the divestment movement that rose across the nation in 2017 in solidarity with Standing Rock and Indigenous allies who are fighting against oil pipelines from being built on their land. These pipelines were, of course, being financed by big banks, and our divestment efforts with other activists across California, from LA to San Francisco to Santa Rosa to Alameda County, then evolved into the public banking movement, which is a movement to divest city and county dollars from predatory Wall Street banks. In 2017, once the city of Seattle had divested $3 billion from Wells Fargo, because they played such a significant role in financing the Dakota Access Pipeline, we knew we had to do the same in LA. And LA, because Wells Fargo is one of the primary banks that LA banked with, and by virtue of our tax dollars sitting in Wells Fargo, we were essentially complicit to these destructive actions, not only funding Dakota Access Pipeline, but funding private prisons and detention centers. So we knew that by creating a movement to divest Wells Fargo, divest the city of Los Angeles from Wells Fargo as the second largest city in the nation, that would send a really powerful message to all big banks across the state, across the nation, that if you finance harm to our communities, we will fight back and we will defund you. Within 9 months of our organizing, we succeeded in getting Los Angeles City Council to divest first $40 million in holding from Wells Fargo, and then also they passed a motion they unanimously approved a motion that disqualified Wells Fargo from issuing an RFP for the city's commercial banking services contracts. And that came down to a combination of grassroots organizing tactics, combining policy and protest. So out of our work with divestment, we quickly realized that if we moved money from Wells Fargo, the only other alternative, considering the size of the city of the city of Los Angeles, the only alternative would be moving it to another big predatory Wall Street bank. And so we knew we had to create a real alternative, which was for the city of Los Angeles to divest from Wall Street altogether by creating a bank that would be 100% accountable to the people. So a movement was born. We led the charge on, we created Measure B, led the charge on the Measure B campaign. We created Public Bank LA, then led the charge on the Measure B campaign. It was a citywide ballot measure for LA to take the first steps to create a public bank. And out of that, it generated a lot of national attention. It really catapulted public banking into a public space. It was an idea that was mostly esoteric at the time, and our organizing around it and the citywide, the city ballot measure really moved it into a much more visible social and political space. So that is a bit of the background and history on how Public Bank LA came to be, and essentially the start of the modern public banking movement began. And I'd also like to add that this is an entirely volunteer-led movement, which makes this fight so much more incredible, that we are taking on Wall Street, the most powerful industry on the planet, as an unfunded volunteer group. And that what makes this even more amazing is that without funding, we were able to out-organize and at this point land multiple victories against a corporate machine. So people power, when organized, can triumph, and that's the moral of the story. So with that, we will start our teach-in. Next slide, please. What is a public bank? So a public bank is a financial institution that's owned by a public entity, either a state, a city, a region, or a joint powers authority. And the deposit base of a public bank are, I'm sorry, I'm stopping this for a second. I only see Naveen on the screen. Is that just my?
I see you, Trinity.
Oh, you do?
Or,
Okay,
like, I
I'm
see you.
sorry.
Okay,
I was just making sure, because I don't see myself, so I'm just making sure that I'm doing the right thing. Okay, you can actually see me speak.
I can.
Okay, okay, sorry about that. All right, good to know. All right, so what is a public bank? A public bank is a financial institution that is owned by a public entity. It can have a city, a state, a region, or a JPA, which is a joint powers authority. And the deposits of a public bank are made from public funds. That's the tax revenues and the fees that our city accrues. That is deposited in a public bank, which that bank then leverages to create loans. And they do that just like any other commercial bank, but unlike private commercial banks, the interest and profit of a public bank belongs to the community. And that is the defining differences. A public bank serves a mission that actually reflects the values and the needs of the community it represents, because they are formed with a social benefit purpose, which requires a public bank to have to invest in and lend to the communities they serve. And local self-control is really central to public banking. The deposits are made locally, investments are made locally, the decision-making process for investments are made locally. And that really is the primary benefit of public bank, because it enables cities like Los Angeles to keep money local. And imagine if our cities could be self-sufficient and able to reinvest public funds back into our communities and redirect that towards things that actually address local needs, like affordable housing and green energy infrastructure and small business loans in underserved areas. A public bank also makes the cost of debt cheaper for the city and state, and it does that by buying and issuing debt below market, because it has access to low cost lending from the Federal Reserve. A public bank can borrow from what's called the Fed discount window, which is a discount rate for money that's only offered to banks. So without public banks right now, cities like LA can't access this discount window. So we have to turn to high cost, expensive borrowing from Wall Street financial institutions. With a city-owned public bank, we can make loans and investments and use public funds to benefit the public instead of private shareholders. So rather than billions of our tax revenues getting siphoned from our cities to out-of-state Wall Street banks, a public bank would allow our state, our localities to recapture the interest that we pay to bondholders and recirculate that money back into the local economy. The public banking model that we're working to build, to create in California per AB 857, the law that we passed at the end of 2019, which I'll go over in a few slides. It creates the public banking model that we're working to create partners with local credit unions and community banks. It's prohibited from competing with them. So California public banks will work with smaller local banks to extend their credit lines so that they can offer low cost and retail consumer benefits. And we're advocating for wholesale banks, which is a city-owned bank, which is sometimes often called a banker's bank, which would become the main depository for cities and regions. We're not competing for customers with community banks and credit unions. This would be a partnership relationship. Next slide, please. Wall Street banks versus public banks. This is a simple graphic, which is essentially public banking in a nutshell, because I think it illustrates the powerful message. Our public funds, the taxes and fees that our city and our state accrues right now sit in private Wall Street banks. We can continue allowing our money to flow towards fossil fuels and weapons of wars and industries that inflict harm and destruction to our earth and our communities, or we can redirect the flow of money back towards sustainable, regenerative, sectors of society like green energy, like a green economy, affordable housing, while we're in the midst of a housing crisis, support local businesses and really focus on community-centered economic development. Next slide, please. The benefits of a public bank, well, aside from all of the positive social benefit, it comes down to a very practical, logical, common sense reason for why cities need to create a public bank is rather than having to rely on Wall Street, we can save money and reinvest in things that matter to Angelina. So there is a fiscally responsible argument to supporting public banks, and that's the ability to be able to maximize the use of our tax dollars. Cities, counties, and states hold billions of our public funds in Wall Street banks, and these Wall Street banks charge our local governments huge fees to hold the deposits and perform the cash management services. This is money that is being extracted out of our communities to line the pockets of private shareholders. And this movement really is about taking the power of money back from private interests and putting it into the hands of the people where it belongs. Nearly 50% of the cost of all infrastructure projects right now goes towards paying bank interest and fees. And if we were able to fund public projects ourselves, we could literally half the cost of infrastructure. That means we double our power to invest in our own communities. That means more money to build roads, more money to build bridges, more money to build schools, more money to rebuild Los Angeles. Billions in public funds over the next 5 years or so, billions of public funds are going to be invested to bring our economy back to recovery. And with a public bank, we can leverage these funds to invest in things like in infrastructure development, climate change mitigation, because a public bank can do what banks do, which is leverage funds up to 10 times to create loans. A city-owned bank would empower LA to lend towards those areas that would actually be impactful and helpful for our community, to our communities and our environment. Municipalities are as I mentioned, they're overcharged on fees and interest through bond placement, and this is even despite their very low incidence of defaults. And outside of banks and established lenders, borrowing and cash access fees are high, especially for groups who face discrimination. Another benefit is expanding access and inclusion. 1 out of 4 in the US are unbanked and underbanked, which means they don't have access to a checking or credit card account. These are basic banking services that folks are, that 1 out of 4 folks, millions in California, are essentially shut out of this financial system. And lack of access inflicts real harm to poor people and people of color, because it's difficult to build wealth if you're targeted and you're preyed upon by big banks and payday lenders with huge fees and huge interest rates. Through partnership lending, public banks can expand access to low-cost financial services to the general public. And towards the end of the deck, I'll discuss AB 1177. That's the current Assembly bill, which we have moving through the legislature, that provides a solution to bank the unbanked and underbanked. Another benefit is I'm almost finished. Another benefit is aligning LA's climate and social goals with its investments and finance policies. Public banking really is essentially about creating a just and equitable alternative to Wall Street. And our mission with Public Bank LA and the California Public Banking Alliance is to explicitly create social and environmentally responsible public banks that are mandated to serve the people. And it's a common sense and logical solution for cities and states to have their financial independence from big banks. And this really is the vehicle for rebuilding and recovery that we need. And it's long overdue for cities to have our own bank. Next slide, please. A snapshot of LA's finances. Looking at LA's the finances of the city of Los Angeles, our city has about $8 billion in annual revenue. Again, that's collected from taxes and fees that our city generates. And LA borrows money from Wall Street to finance things that city needs, which costs over $1 billion annually. The city currently invests its own treasury funds in companies like ExxonMobil, Chevron, JP Morgan Chase, who hold altogether over 500 million of taxpayer funds and a total of 1.6 billion in corporate debt. This is not only financially risky for the city, it works directly against our own climate priorities and the well-being of our residents. It's currently costing us about 100 million in fees and 1.3 billion in debt services. That is the cost for Los Angeles to borrow money from private commercial banks. And imagine the possibilities. Instead of spending almost 500 million a year in debt service for water infrastructure, we could reinvest those funds in climate infrastructure instead of paying interest and fees to big banks. Instead of investing over 1.5 billion of public funds in private corporations, we should invest that in small businesses, especially in hard-hit communities of colors. And a public bank, because a public bank can do what banks do, which is allow our city to borrow at bankers' rates and leverage each fund up to 10 times. What we're realizing, what is very evident, is that the trickle-down approach doesn't work. It creates unequal outcomes, and that's a direct result of a financial system that allows money to go to banks that get a cut. The financial system is designed to extract rather than build community wealth and support sustainable development. The current system isn't working, and with a public banking option, we can do better because there is a real social objective to creating a financial system that doesn't exploit people. Next slide, please. Breakdown. So I came across this breakdown in Akers' Cancel Wall Street report, and this graphic really hits home and puts the potential of public banking into perspective. Los Angeles currently spends over $1 billion paying interest to Wall Street banks, and here this breakdown shows some of the essential services that our money could instead fund. Instead of paying $1 billion in interest to Wall Street banks, we could help over 51,000 families from being thrown onto the streets. During the pandemic, we could have provided $600 a week in pandemic unemployment assistance to over 200,000 people. We could have provided internet access to every single student in the LA Unified School District. So the city is financing itself by selling bonds to private corporations and buying bonds issued by private corporations rather than exporting our public funds for private profit. Our demand is that we keep our public funds public, and public banking is how we do that. Next slide, please. BND and SparkHas. Globally, nearly 40% of banks are publicly owned, and they generate over 40 trillion of global wealth. BND and SparkHas are two known examples of public banking. The Bank of North Dakota is the only public bank in the United States. This was a bank that was founded in 1919, over a century ago. It withstood the economic crash of 2008 because it didn't get involved in risky banking practices. As the only public bank in the United States, it is more profitable than Goldman Sachs and JP Morgan Chase. It has an 18% ROI, return on investment, over $7 billion returned back to the state treasury. BND, the savings of BND are passed back onto borrowers and communities. And this is despite the Bank of North Dakota being in a red state. They are doing something right. It's a proven and successful model for banking. Not only did the Bank of North Dakota, the state of North Dakota, survive the Great Recession during the COVID-19 pandemic, the Bank of North Dakota actually provided more PPP loans, Paycheck Protection Program loans, to small businesses than any other state. And why is that? Because they are a public bank. They don't have the leakages or the huge fees of Wall Street banks. They were able to deploy capital quicker, more efficiently to help small businesses get back on their feet. Another benefit of public banking is that they would have lower operating costs. One of the biggest benefits of public banks is because that public bankers are public servants, and that means no bonuses, no fees, no commissions, no high-paid CEOs, no private shareholders, no advertising costs. A network of 400 municipal public banks in Germany, called Sparkassen, was able to finance over 70% of their green energy transition. They were able to finance their renewable energy installations, energy efficient retrofits. So the potential to fund critical housing developments to the Green New Deal to funding in marginalized communities becomes unlimited with potentially unlimited with a public bank. In the past 20 years, Germany has been able to achieve over 40% of its energy production from solar, and this transition was made possible by their network of public banks providing the majority of the investment through low-cost long-term loans. With that wraps up the first portion of the presentation. So I'll hand it over to Naveen with Public Bank LA, who'll present on the next 8 slides, and then I'll be jumping back on at the end to discuss 1177 and our action steps. So take it away, Naveen. Thanks.
Hey, everyone. Thanks for having me again. Thanks for having us. We're really excited to be here together. I think one thing I wanted to frame as a footnote to this conversation is that the Public Bank of LA is a novel idea. It's a new idea in terms of how it will be formed and what its priorities are. I mentioned earlier that I'm coming to this work from affordable housing. A year ago, I was working for a bank that basically, when the pandemic hit, we were doing affordable housing lending, trying to make about 11% on average. And we had about a $500 million portfolio. When the pandemic hit, what we did was cut our targeted portfolio from 500 million to 400 million for the fiscal year ahead, and increase our spread so that we would make our loans more profitable. That is to say that affordable housing became more expensive when the pandemic hit. And that gives you a flavor for how banks work. Banks, generally speaking, are optimizing for profit. If they're doing things that support small businesses, if they're investing in underserved communities, if they're investing in green infrastructure, it's because they have a financial or regulatory incentive to do so. And generally speaking, those regulations are kind of inadequate in terms of actually how do you sufficiently incentivize something, because what you're trying to do is align profit. That's what this model is trying to flip on its head. Anybody in affordable housing will likely agree that the way that we build affordable housing in particular, as a side note, it doesn't make the most sense because it's market driven. In the same way that the reason this slide in particular, we're talking about the Green New Deal, the city of LA has a goal to be carbon neutral by 2050. And the fact is that we're working against that goal by having $1.5 billion invested in fossil fuels of our taxpayer money. So we need to demand more alignment with our stated goals, what we want for Angelenos, what we want for our future, what we want for the generations ahead, with the way that we're spending our money right now and where we're investing it, who we're borrowing it from. And so Public Bank of LA can do this in a few different ways. You can think about it, as Trinity mentioned, infrastructure costs a whole lot less when the city can sell bonds to itself. This is a long-term vision, but it's possible. It's what the Bank of North Dakota does as well. The city could be able to sell bonds to itself, and so all the money that it spends on debt service will come back to the city, and that means that you save about again 3% on any loan over 30 years, and you'll end up spending half of the money in addition to the principal amount in debt service costs. So when you're recapturing that, you're saving a whole lot of money that you can use to invest in the actual services that you're trying to support. Another way that a public bank can target efforts that support a Green New Deal is by supporting the folks who are already doing it. There are tons of people, tons of organizations like the Sunrise Movement, like LA Forward, that directly support policy advocacy, that are doing the work to lay the groundwork for the 400,000 jobs that the city of LA wants to create using the Green New Deal. And by investing in their work directly, by investing in community banks that are supporting that work, through something that's known as participation lending, which I'll get to later. The Public Bank of LA becomes a hub, becomes kind of the key financial infrastructure that you build all this future on top of. And that's really what the vision is here. It's about flipping the current financial model on its head. I think we think about infrastructure, right? It's where we talk about this a lot at the federal level right now. But what is infrastructure? It's a means of access. And right now, our financial infrastructure is privatized. We need a public financial infrastructure to create public financial access. And that means Angelenos, that means small businesses, that means CDFIs, that means the city itself. Another thing that I think is especially important, again, I worked at a bank long enough to understand, I think, where their priorities are. Right now, banks have an incentive to invest in the communities they serve in, known as the Community Reinvestment Act. This is a piece of legislation that passed in the late 70s, designed to, again, create a market incentive for banks to invest in their communities. It's kind of an opaque measure, though, and it's very often gamed. So that is, a bank that wants to look good in the eyes of the federal regulators can buy a local bank, can extract all the deposits from that bank and invest them anywhere, but then they get points for being in a local community. It has a perverse incentive, that is to say, rather than a community bank that might invest locally and keep money local, might take deposits locally, but because they only have 1 or 2 branches, they're actually viewed less favorably by the federal regulators. It's also, again, it's a pretty opaque system. This system doesn't work. We've known this for since redlining existed, which was implemented by the banks, developed by the federal government as a way of credit scoring. This is exactly why a public bank needs to target its work to undo decades of redlining, decades of disinvestment, of deliberate structural racism. That's what I think is at the heart of a lot of this work. Think about check cashing. Trinity spoke briefly to this, and so did Assemblymember Santiago. AB 1177 specifically is targeting all the folks who have to pay 10% of their paycheck, 6% to get a check cashed. We know this. We know that 80% of bank fees are paid for by 20% of account holders. We know that if you're low income, you're 3 times as likely to have to pay a bank fee. This is predatory lending. This is a predatory behavior perpetuated by the private markets on especially people of color, low income people. We know all this, but we accept it because, I mean, in my mind, I don't know why we accept it, but the standing knowledge is that this is our financial system and this is how it works. And so we have to create incentives for banks to do better. And I don't think that that's the right rationale. We have to demand more from our controller, from our treasurer, from our public officials who are the ones actually deciding to invest in JP Morgan, who are the ones deciding to invest in to make their deposits in Bank of America. It has to be much more far-reaching in how we think. The public bank can do this by providing access to low-cost capital. The way that we've envisioned this happening is something that, again, other public banks have done, known as participation lending. So basically, a public bank can find the community banks, the community development financial institutions, basically the local players that are already doing this, and support their balance sheets. That is, occupy a piece of their balance sheet. So if they're doing $100 million of small business loans, the public bank can own a portion of that or guarantee a portion of that, which allows that same institution to go out and do more of what they're already doing. It's a very simple idea. It's been done at the federal level as well as at the state level. There's a statewide program that does that regularly, and then that boosted its efforts during the pandemic. We need a city and a local equivalent to offer that low-cost capital in communities that need it most. And you can also think about that in terms of CDFIs and folks that do check cashing services by increasing their capacity. There's also an aspect of like technical assistance, helping, again, build that ecosystem, that network for the folks who are already doing the work. Housing and transit, you don't need to hear about the need for more housing, and we don't need to hear about the need for better transit in Los Angeles if you've lived here for a hot minute. I again come to this work from housing. In the housing industry right now, there is basically a kind of mismatch between the financing that's available and the financing that's needed. So if I want to go and build, 100 units, 5 stories, anywhere in LA, I can get a mortgage, a 40-year mortgage at 3.5%. If I'm, a credit-worthy borrower, like an established nonprofit. But what I have a lot more difficulty doing is the stuff that's listed in that first bullet point. Pre-development financing, permanent supportive housing, hotel acquisition, or if you're tenants trying to purchase your own building, which there's a lot of more movement towards legislating for that in California, like Washington, D.C. has legislated for. These are considered riskier types of financing. In actuality, they're not. Affordable housing is one of the safest asset classes in the country. The bank I worked for had its lowest losses. It honestly, I think, had no losses in its 25 years of doing affordable housing lending. Compare that to commercial real estate, compare that to anything. Affordable housing is a very safe investment, but some of the product types just aren't there. And that's because banks don't see the need to do it. Other banks aren't doing it. They're not making as much money as they would if they just did mortgages. So by creating a public bank that focuses on the types of funding that is needed for housing to actually get built, for hotels to get converted, that's what this public bank can do. And then I spoke about the cost of infrastructure. Many of the folks in this Zoom room probably voted for Measure HHH, which created a $1.2 billion bond measure that was issued and is still being issued in tranches of about $300 million worth of bonds. So these are notes these are IOUs that are being sold and that are being paid for with interest. So $1.2 billion costs another $700 million over 30 years just to get that $1.2 billion. It is a long way away from the Public Bank of LA to be able to spend a $1.2 billion on bonds, but it is absolutely necessary, because if you think about who's issuing those bonds, the first round of those bonds was issued by Morgan Stanley, and probably bought in part by Morgan Stanley. So what we're saying is taxpayer funds will support Morgan Stanley's profits over the next 30 years so that we can build affordable housing. And in no world does that make sense. In no world is that the most efficient way for us to build housing. Take that and you flip it on its head. You think about LAUSD's teachers. LAUSD currently has a pension fund that's invested with the California Statewide Teachers Union, CalSTRS. They invest in a whole gamut of things, among which is, again, folks like Blackstone, who are commercial real estate focused, but they also bought up about 200,000 homes in the aftermath of the recession, and have kind of serially evicted, especially Section 8 tenants, and created a revolving door of low-income tenants in a lot of these single-family homes and a lot of their assets, because that's what they are at the end of the day. They're assets, not homes. What if the LAUSD pension fund wasn't invested with Blackstone, but was instead invested in an affordable housing pre-development fund that deliver the same returns, totally feasible? There's just not a mechanism in place. There's not that kind of coordination to say that we need to be investing in our own social good. Instead, we outsource the financing on all fronts, and we lose on all fronts. Small businesses, again, I mentioned that there's a statewide program that focuses on underwriting standards. So what that means is if you issue a loan to a business that, as an example, has 10 or fewer people, is working in a disadvantaged community, is focused on, or like in this case, it was mostly like retail businesses. I'm talking about a statewide program that's run by the Infrastructure Bank. What they're doing is they're guaranteeing pools of small business loans. And so by putting up a small tranche of money, call it 5 or 10% on a $100 million loan, so $5 or $10 million, they're guaranteeing a whole pool of $100 million loans. And historically, these assets, in the case of the state level, have like an insignificant failure rate, about 0.1% per year. So they're not very risky assets, small business loans. You create underwriting standards so that you're looking at people's credit. You can also create more innovative measures than just credit scores, which are kind of racist and exclusive way of measuring credit worthiness. But you can target the types of loans that you want to underserved communities directly, and that's really important because what you're doing is you're setting your priorities. You're prioritizing the businesses that are most important to you as Angelinos, rather than the businesses that banks tend to prioritize. Which fact is, like, small business loans are just more administrative burden for a bank to do. They're not riskier, but they're more of a headache. So banks tend not to focus on a business, a street vendor who needs a small loan because they can make more money lending to Ralph's on their line of credit, right? It shouldn't be that way, but that's the way that the incentives are for banks, and we need to flip that model on its head to support worker-owned co-ops, to support small businesses through these host of mechanisms that already exist, through these host of programs that have already been tried and true at the state and federal level. Right now, we're in an interesting moment where we're focused on kind of this idea of building back better, right? What does that actually mean? I think that there is a consensus that getting back to the way things were isn't exactly the solution that we're looking for, because we had plenty of problems in January of last year, just like we do now, and we will in the future. As a result of the pandemic, there is a host of money that's coming in from the federal government, about 1.3 billion to the city of Los Angeles in particular, half of which has already arrived, and the other half will come next year. There's also a tranche of close to $1 billion that will come to the state that's supposed to support small business lending funds and supposed to be leveraged. The fact is that we don't really have at the local level any mechanism to expand on this money, to leverage it, to use it to do things like loan guarantees. All we're set up to do is to spend it once. And if we're doing that, we're really doing ourselves a disservice. Like, how can you build back better if we're doing it in an unsustainable way, right? That's really what I think this public financial infrastructure is about. It's about creating a more sustainable financial infrastructure that can endure for generations. And I think there's a good chance that a lot of this money that the city is getting will be spent in a one-off way. It's not going to be enough no matter what, but I think we have to be thinking about how do you function like a bank in terms of regenerating your capital, in terms of reinvesting so that your money is working for you. Because we all know in this country that the people who have the money make the money. And right now, cities aren't doing that enough for themselves. I want to spend a minute speaking particularly about governance. This bank it doesn't exist right now, right? It's a nascent institution, and it exists only insofar as the people in this room and the people you talk to after this, and the people you discuss this on social media with, and your council members. It exists only insofar as everyone envisions it. We have worked in conjunction with the Democracy Collaborative on a paper on governance. A researcher named Michael Brennan, who's on our chat and will be available for questions later, we're going to be publishing a paper he worked on to propose a governance structure for this banking institution. I think that it cannot be understated how important that this bank be run publicly, be run with a public mandate. The structure that we've proposed is a 99-person General Assembly drawn from each of the 99 neighborhood council districts, not neighborhood council members per se, but each of the districts using as a kind of districting process with 3-year terms and a year of training for each member. So that means that in the same way that the goal of this presentation is to make what is traditionally considered inaccessible, the city's finances, how it invests, how it governs itself, and it runs its pocketbook, traditionally considered off limits to members of the general public, it shouldn't be. In fact, it should be members of the general public who are governing those decisions via the General Assembly in this public bank. In parallel to that, we've proposed mission-driven commissions. So things like reparations, things like affordable housing, supportive housing. How do we create how do we take the general public mandate of the bank and translate that into products like a universal baby bond, so that any person born in the city of Los Angeles will have an account that has $1,000 deposited in their name, and then it will be available to them 18 years later. I think that it will be invested in things like affordable housing all along the way. That's a fundamentally important part of what this bank is, that the people will decide what it does and how it is run. It is a public financial infrastructure. And again, like I was saying earlier, our financial infrastructure, and like Trinity alluded to as well, if the city of LA wants to borrow, it has to go to a private bank. The federal government spun up a facility to allow cities to borrow, but it did it at rates that were basically predatory. It would have been cheaper for the city to go to a private bank, a commercial bank, and borrow during the pandemic. In the case of LA, about 1.8% above the overnight rate and whatever spread that the Federal Reserve wanted to put. Compare that to and it would have to be paid back within 2 years. Compare that to a commercial bank that could borrow from the Federal Reserve at 0%. The Federal Reserve could not get money out the door to banks quick enough, and so they said, borrow as long as you want for nothing. It won't cost you a dime. In Europe, rates went negative, which meant that the central bank was paying banks to take the money, because that's how trickle-down economics works. We say, we'll give money to the people at the top, and then eventually it'll get down to the people who need it. Again, that's not the model that works. We've seen this, and that's what part of the federal stimulus acts have tried to recognize, is that we need to be giving money more directly. And in that case, it was with stimulus payments. A public bank is another piece of that, by controlling that public financial infrastructure. We're getting close to wrapping up, so thank you for your patience. We're looking forward to a robust Q&A after this. I want to go back to the process that is set forward by the Assembly Bill 857, the California Public Banking Act. This bill was passed and signed into law in October of 2019 by Governor Newsom. It was, again, a grassroots-led bill. It was not a lobbyist-led bill, and I think that a lot of folks on Wall Street think that this is the wrong effort. The fact is that Wall Street could lose some money, but honestly, the reality is that this isn't even meant to be competitive with Wall Street. This is meant to be supplementary to Wall Street, to do the things that Wall Street doesn't want to do. And a public bank ecosystem will support profits, will continue to support profits from Wall Street. And there have been folks who have studied that as well, that these are complementary institutions. Your politics notwithstanding, Wall Street is the crux of capitalism in our society, and public banking isn't at its core about tearing down Wall Street. It's about building something that Wall Street hasn't built. I think that's and whether Wall Street wants to come along on that, that's completely up to them. But they will make their money until we at the federal level decide on something else. So this is a banker's bank. This is positioned to support the banks that are already doing the work, that need more support. It'll partner with local community banks and credit unions. It will not be a competitive bank to Wall Street banks. It won't offer retail right now. That means that you or I can't go in and deposit our funds with the city's public bank. That could be the case in the future, but this is again meant to be a pared back approach. It'll also be subject to the Brown Act. It'll be governed by the state Department of Financial Protection and Innovation and the Department of Business Oversight. These are the entities that govern banks in the state in the first place. So it'll be governed like any other bank, but it'll have a public mandate, right? The first step in this process is this business plan. It is preparing a business plan that will be submitted to the state, that will the state will work with the city to develop its charter as part of that application process. This business plan needs to be prepared in concert with everyone in this room. We need to inform what this bank can and will and should be. And it really starts here. As Trinity mentioned, and we'll go into it in a little bit, we're in the beginning of this process. The city council, the broader city council, will vote on releasing the business plan in the coming days. And it's important that we all have the language for understanding what's at stake, and that we not get distracted by some arguments that, like, oh, honestly, like an argument that we often hear is it's a violation of fiduciary duty, of our fiduciary duty, to invest in to support a public bank. And I want to pause on this point, because fiduciary duty is basically like financial responsibility, right? So what's financially more responsible? Investing in mega oil companies, like, again, $1.6 billion between Chevron, ConocoPhillips, ExxonMobil, JP Morgan, US Bank, while we claim to want a zero carbon future? Or should we be investing in the Blackstones of the world, or should we be investing, again, in affordable housing and in infrastructure that builds green jobs, and in making the cost of this infrastructure much lower? To me, that is absolutely the failure of imagination that we're seeing from our city officials, and we need to demand more, because we know that the financial infrastructure that we have will only come along when it is absolutely forced to. And this shouldn't be a game of cat and mouse. We have to build something better, and that's what this is fundamentally about. With that, I'm going to hand it back to Trinity to wrap us up and tell us where to go from here.
Thanks. Can you hear me?
Yep, you're good.
Yeah. Okay, great. Well, thanks, Naveen, for that incredible overview. I'll just wrap with a few additional slides. LA City Council, as you see on this slide here, LA City Council just a few weeks ago unanimously approved a motion in the city's Economic Development and Jobs Committee to move forward with the LA Public Bank. So the motion will now head to full council, and we're working to get the council president to agendize this motion as soon as possible. And once the full council approves the motion, that will then, as Naveen just touched on, will authorize the city's CLA office, the city's chief legislative analyst office, to draft and release a request for proposal, an RFP, in 60 days, in 2 months, to seek consultant services to be able to conduct the policy, the fiscal, the economic analysis behind forming a public bank to serve the city of Los Angeles, as well as setting a set of criteria with the amendments that we had introduced. And the consultant will then take part in a community engagement process. And as Naveen had also just mentioned, and I'll reiterate, this is why it's critical for stakeholders to be part of this movement, to build a democratic bank that is truly reflective of our sustainability goals, of our racial equity goals, and our lending priorities. We need your voice. To build a people's bank, we need the input of people in Los Angeles, involved in groups like Sunrise and LA Forward and Act LA. We need your input to design and guide the trajectory of the conversation as the bank is being built. We are ultimately, we are trailblazing for the future and creating a blueprint for the future of finance. This is the revolution happening in real time, and it's up to Los Angeles, one of the global economic and political centers of the world, to be the first to set the stage for the banking revolution. This slide is just a quick snapshot of some of the elected supports that we have behind the public bank, a series of tweets from Councilmember Nathia Rahman, Councilmember Mike Bonin, Councilmember Kevin De Leon, as well as Councilmember Monica Rodriguez, our champion. These are our champions. Next slide, please. Maybe next slide. Should be the 1177 slide.
It's up on my screen.
So okay, now it's up on my screen. Okay, so 1177, this is our last slide. This is the last slide. The movement right now is really accelerating with some incredible wins on multiple campaigns, not only with LA moving forward and moving through committee, but just last Wednesday, our Assembly Bill AB 1177, the California Public Banking Option Act passed the state assembly. I think we had about 48 ayes, which was incredible considering that our work in public banking, as you just saw through the chat, has been heavily targeted by the Wall Street lobby. And even despite the opposition at the state level with the Wall Street lobby going full force, namely the California Bankers Association, it really came down to coordinated strategy with our author, Assembly Member Miguel Santiago, the California Public Banking Alliance statewide volunteer team, our co-sponsors, SEIU California, Fight for 15, Indivisible California, who all contributed to the targeted outreach, the political pressure that really helped us land this incredible win. So now that we've made it out of the Assembly, AB 1177 is headed to the Senate. So we are storming Wall Street on two fronts, at the state level and at the local and city level. And with 1177, what this bill would do would provide all Californians with free access to essential banking services. It creates a BankCal account that anyone can opt in and be able to access a debit card, deposit funds, automate bill pay, and set up direct deposit all without fees or penalties. And why is this important? It's because it's a stat we cited at the beginning of the presentation. 1 out of 4 Californians, nearly half of Black and brown folks, are unbanked or unbanked, which means they don't have access or adequate access to a checking or a bank account, and they have to turn to predatory payday lenders and check cashers for simple banking services because they either don't have enough funds to be able to meet minimum account balances, or even despite having an account, they're gouged with maintenance fees and penalties. And this really causes harm to working class people who are already struggling to survive. So what 1177 would do would create the first program in the country to establish a state level public option banking platform. And this really will help create a path forward for Black, brown, immigrant, and low income folks who have been excluded from the financial system with a zero cost, zero fee, zero penalty bank account, so that all Californians, regardless how much money you have in the bank, can be able to access banking services. And just last week, LA City Council actually unanimously voted to endorse 1177, and that was really great momentum leading into our Assembly floor vote. This bill is endorsed by over 200 organizations, over 100 delegates of the California Democratic Party, and we're gearing up for a big fight in the Senate. We're headed to our first committee in the Senate Banking Committee in just a few weeks. So we'll need your support, and I'll drop links at the end with our action network letter to sign and share. And our final slide is our call to action. So thank you all for staying with us for the past hour. We have three action steps. The first is to call your council member and urge their support for the public bank. We're grateful that we already have the support that we have coming into this, into the full floor vote. Council, as we saw on the previous slide, Bonin, Kevin De Leon, Nithya Raman, Monica Rodriguez, also coming out of the committee that we received unanimous support on, Curran Price, Blumenfield, Krikorian, Harris Johnson. So 8 out of 15 council members support the LA Public Bank. So if those are one of your council members, call them and thank them for their leadership. If you are in the districts of the other 7 council members, call and urge them for support in the public bank. Second action step is take a quick minute to sign our action network letter to LA City Council, bit.ly/support PBLA. And third action step is sign our letter to support our state bill, AB 1177, the California Public Banking Option Act, and please let your state senators know to support BankCal. Yes, on AB 1177. So thank you all for staying with us. I'll hand it back over to Tana, to Sasha and Caitlin and the LA Forward team. And I think Ben Gordon's on. I think we'll also bring on Ben Gordon with PBLA to help with our Q&A and discussion portion of the teaching.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Trinity and Naveen, for this incredibly important and thorough presentation. And thank you for your tireless activism. The Public Bank LA movement is truly a testament to the power of grassroots organizing. So thank you for educating our community today. I hope everyone on this Zoom call feels excited and empowered to advocate for a public bank for Los Angeles, because it's going to take all of us to create a real people's bank here in Los Angeles. So with that said, I'm really excited to open up Q&A now. Due just to the numbers of people, which is amazing, that are all here, I want to make sure that we can get to as many questions as possible. So we're going to ask that people post your questions to the chat, and we will work to get as many of your questions answered here as possible. So once again, thank you so much, Trinity and Naveen. This was incredible. We are so grateful for your time and for your tireless efforts here. So go ahead, everyone. If you have questions, throw them in the chat.
Thank
Hey,
you all
let's
for
put
having.
I'm sorry, let's, if we can take a second, so if someone can put the bit.ly link for the support letter. Sorry, Naveen, go ahead.
Oh yeah. While other folks, I saw some questions come through that I think other folks had chimed in on, in particular around home buying programs, and Lionel had asked a question around the city controller, whether the city controller will be will control the bank. The way that, so I guess first, Colette, I think you would ask the questions about home buying programs. Right now, that's supported by the Housing and Community Investment Department of the City of LA. It's an understaffed department in general. I think that what this bank will be able to do is expand a lot of that lending activity and centralize it, and create a direction, like a direction for much of that lending activity, i.e. to disadvantaged communities in particular. A lot of that right now kind of happens in an operational vacuum between different city agencies and also the county. And the way that it's funded is also different. Like HCID at the city level issues bonds, and then so does the county through its different development authorities. This could be different in that this would be the public bank actually directly supporting home mortgages. There's a precedent for this in San Francisco, where the city of San Francisco supports nonprofits trying to buy naturally occurring quote unquote affordable housing. So basically, this is the public bank coming in where the private banks are right now, either in the first position, and then the rest is supported by private banks, which just by the public being present in the first position makes a big difference in terms of where the money goes and what money is supported. Or by like being in the whole, by taking on a whole stack of mortgages, which requires obviously a lot of scale. Lionel, to your question around the city controller, it depends. The city controller is interested in public banking. The way that it's envisioned right now is it's controlled by the city council and the mayor, which the city controller would inform that but not direct it. We can now turn to the questions in the chat.
Great. So one that came up early oh, go ahead, Trinity.
Oh, I was just gonna call out one I just saw about the timeline for 1177 passing. So the bill is going to go into the Senate committee hearing, the Senate Banking Committee hearing in a few weeks on June 23rd. So we're about 2 weeks out. Once it passes Senate Banking, it'll most likely be triple referred. So it'll go to either the Labor Committee or potentially the Judiciary Committee, and then Appropriations. So we've got 3, potentially 4 more committees to go through, but and then we'll hit the floor end of August. And then once we pass the Senate floor, then it will be up for Newsom to sign, Governor Newsom to sign, hopefully the first week of September.
Thank you, Trinity. All right, so first coming up in the chat, a question from Luke. How do we protect a public bank from the corruption that is deep-rooted in city government? How do we utilize the public bank to get the city to not invest in devastating events like the Olympics, which currently private banks finance?
That's the question, to be honest. Like, this bank needs to be governed cohesively and centrally, but at the same time, it shouldn't be a tool to extract again private profits from public dollars. The way that we've envisioned this is with a democratic governance system that has members drawn from the public. I saw another question around how will you support if neighborhood councils are predominantly wealthy white males. How do you actually get a democratic process out of that? The idea is that it's actually random. You would select individuals from every neighborhood council district, but not actually folks who are sitting on the council per se, and that you would train them. You would give them the training so that whoever they are, wherever they're coming from, none of this is rocket science. So by bringing people in a democratic general assembly, that's a big part of how do you ensure that there's not corruption, and then also creating an accountability mechanism via this mandate. So if there's a public mandate, there's commissions that are designed to implement different aspects of that mandate. What happens in the back end? What happens every year? What happens every 3 years? The governance paper that we'll be releasing will be focused on, I think it's a 3-year or a 2-year survey process, which has teeth to it, which is to say that there's a survey. How is the bank doing? What else would you like to see that can be done truly to the whole public? It can be, and you would envision it something with like a marketing budget, so that this is just like we see the census. We saw the census last year. Everybody, you're really going out of your way to get everyone's voice heard, and that drives a report that the board is actually held to. So whatever comes from those surveys actually has to inform the subsequent public mandate for the bank in its next cycle. I think that is really important. And the last piece is actually how it's governed from a regulatory perspective, like a bank, which is to say that it'll be governed by the state, and it will require provisions to avoid conflicts of interest, and in addition, as a public entity, it will be subject to the Brown Act. So everything can be FOIA'd, Freedom of Information Acted. So there will be a lot more transparency and a lot more eyes on it intrinsically. So that's kind of how we're thinking about how do you avoid corruption, because it's endemic to any institution, and you have to be mindful of it from before its existence.
Great, thank you, Naveen. So our next question was earlier during the.
Well, you know what? Can I just add, Naveen? Did you mention our work, our collaboration with Democracy Collaborative?
I did, yeah.
Maybe I missed that. Okay.
Yeah. That paper will be coming out in about a couple of weeks, and we'll be sure to send it to all the folks on the same list.
Awesome. So the next question we have was earlier in Naveen and Trinity's presentation from Lionel. So when speaking about affordable housing and permanent supportive housing, et cetera, how are we going to address utilities such as water, power, sewage, trash collection? Will this also include that?
That's a good question. I generally put utilities in the bucket of physical infrastructure. Right now, for instance, we have a wastewater bond that we service to the tune of about $500 million, $500 million that we're going to pay for our wastewater collection debt service every year, and that's out of the city's budget. So if we're financing a lot of this infrastructure through bonds and we're selling these bonds to private investors, we're again losing all that money on debt service. When this bank gets to scale, it will be able to buy those same bonds from that are issued so that we can do all sorts of utility provision, and that's when you start to see cost savings. That basically we're not financing these subject to private profit. We're financing them in a way that allows for like what's called fiscal recapture. Basically, you're buying bonds, but then you're paying debt service on those bonds, but all that money that you're paying on those bonds comes right back into city pockets, so that you can do more of the exact same thing that you're already doing.
Awesome. I'm going to skip ahead into, I think that leads into another question that actually Mike posed around actually, funding the initial beginning of the public bank. So Mike asks, is any lobbying on the state level set aside, is any lobbying on the state level to set aside some of the state's surplus as seed money into California public banks?
It's a great question. Of course, once the states and the cities knew that they were getting the money, they found ways to spend it a few times over. There is lobbying on the specific money that's allocated for small business funding to be put into a bank-like mechanism that would allow for loan guarantees. At the state level, I think it's absolutely our goal that the money that's coming from the federal government be used to capitalize a public bank. And in a way, there is a state institution that already acts like a public bank, but in very specific ways, specifically for small business and like physical infrastructure, the infrastructure bank. And they will get some of that money invariably, but I think we're working on efforts to increase what they can get. And then at the local level, again, the city will be receiving over $1 billion, and the budgetary process is it's far from final. So especially with much of this money will be coming in tranches, i.e., not the second half of it won't be coming for another year. So this is absolutely an active campaign in terms of what becomes possible if we try to multiply this money, try to leverage it in the form of a public bank.
Great, thank you. And kind of building off that discussion of kind of moving forward with establishing public banks here in California, we've got a question from Rebecca. Will there be a strategic plan to support getting the bill out of committee that we ourselves here today could support?
I'll let Trinity speak to that.
Which committee? At the LA or at the state?
I think it was at the LA level.
At the LA level? We're going simultaneous on two bills.
Oh, I'm sorry. I'm sorry, state. It looks like somebody's chimed in the chat.
I'm trying to look. At the state level, is there a strategy on getting it out of committee? Well, we looked at the Senate banking, the makeup of the Senate Banking Committee, and we're pretty optimistic that we have the votes, but senators, of course, are a lot more difficult to maneuver around than assembly members. But right now we're going to start we're focusing on doing direct outreach to the senators and the Senate Banking Committee. And we'll be working on that with SEIU California and the California Public Banking Alliance statewide team. So if you're interested in getting involved in our statewide work, reach out to us at calpba@gmail.com. We do have a statewide alliance of advocates and activists representing 11 cities in California that we're doing this work at the state level with. And we're also working with that bill alongside Indivisible California, who's been really instrumental in helping us do direct lobbying. So with the senators, we've got 21 senators. That's the number of votes that we need to pass the Senate. And we've got a handful of co-authors who have already signed on board, like Senator Hueso, Senator I'm sorry, Hueso, who are the other senators? I'm blanking out right now. We have a few other senators, but we'll be working on our lobbying strategy in the next coming week, preparing for our first Senate banking hearing on June 23rd.
Awesome. And then there's just a quick follow-up, I think, to focus maybe back on the city. You had mentioned in the slide previous, or your last slide, calls to action, but just maybe reiterate who, the current city councilors that are on board, those that are not, and that we should be calling, either thanking or addressing those that have not yet supported.
Yeah. So the clear champions of the LA Public Bank motion, those who have come forward, tweeted about it, have joined us on our town hall. Councilmember Mike Bonin, Nithya Raman, Kevin DeVione, and Monica Rodriguez. Now, coming out of the Economic Jobs Development Committee, the committee that we just unanimously passed, Councilmember Curran Price has now let us know that he wants to be part of the leadership team in getting the LA and supporting the public bank. So Curran Price has now come on board to support, as well as Bob Blumenfield, Paul Krikorian, and Marquise Harris Dawson. So that rounds out 8 of the 15 council members. And of course, Council President Nuri agendized AB 1177, which just passed last week. LA City Council approved the resolution to endorse 1177. So that gives us positive. We feel that she's going to be supportive of the LA Public Bank, considering that she just passed a resolution, supported a resolution endorsing our state bill.
Great. So the next couple of questions we have are a little bit more about kind of clearing up the fundamentals of a public bank. And one of the questions was from Janae, and I think we have some folks in the chat who are helping to address Janae's question, but in case others weren't kind of following the chat, I thought it would be helpful to pose to everyone here. So we would love some more clarification on how a public bank is different from a credit union.
Sure, of course. That's a good question. A credit union is focused on its members. So it provides like check cashing services, deposit services within a specific like union, for instance, a labor union. This is a little bit more expansive in that this public bank can support credit unions. So if a credit union would offer a favorable rate on a mortgage to one of its members, this bank can support them by offering them like balance sheet support, buying some of their loans, as an example. I'm getting a notification that my internet is unstable, so I'm turning off my camera.
I in brief, a credit union is mandated to serve private citizens, and a public bank is mandated to serve cities and counties, or potentially states.
Absolutely. This is a bigger effort. It's a broader effort that focuses as well on the city, on supporting existing community banks, and can eventually support the whole Angelenos writ large. Whereas a credit union again it's focused on its individual members.
Awesome, thank you. So this is another one I think that is interesting in the sense of differentiating between types of banks and their capabilities. And so Angela asked, one point of debate I've heard often is that big banks have certain capabilities that allow them to be more efficient than local banks due to their inherent economies of scale. How do folks in the public banking world usually address this point?
That's a good point. It's a good question. I think it's interesting though, because that's something that you'll often hear from the big banks. Having worked at a big bank, I can ensure you that an $80 billion bank is not more efficient than a $1 billion bank. Banks that are that large don't actually know what's going on in different parts of the bank, and that's by design. It is enormously cumbersome to run such a bank, and that's also why power is so well entrenched in these banks. And there's a scholar from Princeton, Anatha Matti. She wrote about basically she did some math to figure out what is the optimal size of a bank, and it's about $1 billion. That's kind of a figure that Mirza Baradaran from UCI had also cited. Basically, when you get bigger than that, you lose a lot of efficiency, and we saw that with Bank of America, for instance. They're tasked with administering unemployment benefits on behalf of EDD at the state level. So, but there's over $100 million worth of fraud in those paychecks that people aren't getting because the bank didn't administer it because it's not their priority. That said, there are things that right now banks do better. Banks have capacity to print debit cards, to print checks, to do cash management services, like the things that actually involve the way that we interact physically with money, to underwrite bonds. These are things that the banking system has evolved to do, and it will take time for the Public Bank of LA to do those things, to develop those expertise, to hire those people. But I think that the idea that Bank of America's scale is fundamentally better than community banks is probably not wholly right, and we need to, and I think that this bank will chip away at that bit by bit as it develops its own capacity.
Awesome. Thanks, Naveen. All right, we have one final question that came in. Has there been any discussion on funding for tenants to directly own their buildings as cooperatives? I think expanded to TOPA potentially, as well as just community land trusts and other forms of non-commodified housing that could be funded by a public bank.
Absolutely. I think that this is, again, it like speaks to what the product mismatch is if like in DC, for instance, if DC has Tenant Opportunity to Purchase Act, that means that if a developer wants to come in and buy a building, they have to partner with a tenants association. The tenants have to form an association, but it's ultimately the developer that's buying the building. It's the developer that's shaping the course of the building because the developer has access to the money. What this public bank can do is create a loan product that targets exactly exactly that, exactly these tenants associations who don't have access to conventional mortgages they would if they were individuals or if they were developers. That product doesn't exist right now because banks don't see a financial incentive. Same thing with community land trusts. A big part of affordable housing, the riskiest part, is that pre-development funding, and community land trusts often struggle to get the money in the door so that they can go out and, quote unquote, tie up a property. That means like get into escrow for 3 months or 6 months, because you need to be able to say, hey, this is a parking lot that has now had its zoning change, and we want to buy it now before someone else does. This is the Santa Monica Airport, and we want to be able to control its future. Or this is already existing an apartment building in Koreatown that a developer is eyeing to tear down, and we want to buy it so that we can preserve it as affordable housing. That money needs to move faster, and there needs to be more of it, and that's exactly what this bank can do.
Well, thank you, everyone. Sasha, did you want to wrap?
I think Caitlin's going to wrap for everyone.
Okay.
Go ahead, Caitlin.
Yeah, I just wanted to thank everyone for joining us today. This was a great opportunity. We had some amazing guests from Assemblymember Miguel Santiago. We have Angela from Sunrise, and of course, Trinity and Naveen from Public Bank LA, and all of these great supporters here today. Some great discussion as well. So we hope you'll, follow those actions that Trinity and Naveen have been pointing to, and just, stay connected to try to move this forward. But other than that, I hope everyone enjoys the rest of their Sunday. Yeah, thanks so much for joining us.
Thank you, everyone. And thank you to Caitlin and Sasha. Thank you, LA Forward, for coordinating. Thank you all. Thank you so much.
Trinity, do you want to remind folks of our Gmail address in case folks want to reach out?
I put our info at publicbankla.com in there. And we're also at publicbankla@gmail.com.
Yeah. So
you
please
can
reach
go
out
to publicbankla.com or .org to reach us. Thank you all.
Thanks,
Have a great
everyone.
Sunday. Viva la revolución. Thanks, Rachel. Thanks, Mike. Thanks, Lionel. Good seeing you all. Thank you.
Great town hall.
Thank you, Margie. Good to see you. East Bay in the house.
Great job.
Saludos de Mexico.
Thank you. Thank you, Mike from Mexico. Thank you, Rachel. Solidarity.
Great job, guys.
Thank you. Always. Thank you, Rachel.
Did you see Beverly was on as well, Trinity? Beverly from ACE.
Oh, great. Great. So if anyone is interested, we've got another presentation on deck with ACE that we'll be doing in English and Spanish. So if any of your membership is interested in that, we'll be coordinating that with ACE.
Yeah,
well, thank you
that's
all.
wonderful.
I want to say hi, hey to Nick. Good to see you. All right, ready to jump. Well, thank you, Anna. Thank you all. Thank you, Sasha.
Thanks
thank
for all that.
Caitlin. And thank
you both.
Yeah,
This
sorry about that derailing of us. I had emailed you at the beginning when I saw his name. I was like, uh-oh.